conversations. But I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic and great start for this. And maybe I think I want to break it out into two components here, right? So there's a youth component, youth focus, and then there's a faith focus, and then I guess there's an intersectionality there. And maybe I would like to kind of also listen to to where others are coming from in terms of the intersectionality. But let me start with the youth perspective, because I think that's probably a natural point from where I work. I think the first and foremost, as I think Emin has stated, and Eva, you stated in your introductions, young people are leading changes today. They're quite active. They're quite vocal in terms of wanting to see change, and I think that speaks to a sense of energy and dynamism that we often don't attribute to young people. One of the projects that we work on as the Big Six is called the Global Youth Mobilization, where we ask a simple question: tell us a problem in your community, tell us a solution, and we'll happily kind of try and find some funding to actually give you support to that. And over the last sort of 2 cycles that we've run this, so within the last 6 months, we've received something like 20,000 applications from young people, which means that young people have a thirst for actually solving problems at their local community. The problem is that most of us don't actually ask them. And even if we ask them, we don't follow through on anything, right? We consult them and we tick the box, but we're not really following through. And so I think that the first thing that I really want to kind of put on the table is that if we really want to sort of engage with young people, then we need to provide a seat at the table, and we need to be able to listen to what they have to offer, and also work with them in an intergenerational solidarity to allow them to actually come up with some solutions to their problems. Because often what also happens is that the young people are not necessarily saying that they have the ideal solution. They have a solution, and they're willing to actually listen to where you think you might be able to offer things. And so when we ask young people, what do you need from us? Of course, funding is definitely part of the need or the demand, but they also say, well, we need a platform where we can share ideas with others, where we can learn from others, where we can troubleshoot and brainstorm, because we need that kind of engagement. So I think we miss something if we keep on thinking about the fact that it's just about funding. It's not. There's a number of other things there that need to be brought in. So I think that the first thing is that we need to create that space for that type of perspective. And I often talk about a new business model for youth engagement, where we're talking about a co-creating. So we co-create with young people, we co-lead. It's intergenerational and it's intersectional, because again, young people are not homogeneous, right? We talk about young people and we lump them into this whole group of things that we think they all have the same needs. They're not. They have different needs depending on where they are, and I think it's important for us to have that perspective. So I think that there's one aspect around changing that business model, thinking about how we look at that, mainly because I think we sort of operate on a 19th century infrastructure, or the 20th century sort of mindset, trying to address a 21st century need. And I think those things don't compute. So I think the first and foremost is the business model. Second thing is the narrative. And I think that's very important. We often hear people saying, oh, young people are the future, and so we need to give them. What does that mean? That means that, yeah, okay, sometime down the line, you have an opportunity, right? Not today, because the future is there, right? So if we really want to start the conversation, we're going to need to change the narrative. And that is that young people are part and parcel of the conversation of solutions, of understanding what needs to happen. For those of us who've grown up with Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, the Emperor's New Clothes is a classic case of the young person actually understanding what no one else understood, right? Which was the emperor had no clothes. And so if we really want to kind of engage young people, then yeah, I think we need to recognize they have those values. And so when we talk about that intersectional approach, where young people are, I mean, I think they are architects of, or they have a couple of roles. They can be an architect, they can of the change. They can be an agent, they can be an advocate, they can also be an anchor and an amplifier. And I think those are the roles that we need to think about when we engage with young people. So that's the first thing. The first thing is young people. We need to provide the space. Then the second thing is, where does faith come into this, right? Because most of us, particularly working in the multilateral system, we don't really do faith, right? Faith is slightly uncomfortable for us, even though we recognize that faith is a lived experience of communities and we instrumentalize faith, but we really don't engage with faith. And I think that does a disservice, because faith is a lived experience of communities. And so if we really want to engage with communities, we have to understand that faith is part of their identity. And I think, Eva, as you mentioned, that, faith traditions or spiritual traditions view life as interconnected. It's woven together in this delicate balance of mind, body, spirit, environment. And so there's a holistic approach to this wholeness that spiritual traditions have. And I think we need to acknowledge and address that. And we need to kind of meet people at those perspectives of mental, intellectual, spiritual, physical. And that's where I think the faith traditions come in, spiritual traditions come in. And so, faith traditions, wherever they are, they talk around, faith, the value of wholeness, the values of stewardship, the value of balance. All of those things are things that are shared amongst the different faith traditions. And so when we talk about faith and planetary health, I think, this concept of wholeness and this concept of using faith and spiritual traditions to reimagine a conversation around what does the health of the planet look like? How do we look at healing? I think all of those things allows us to have that integrated approach, and that recognizes that interconnectedness that is there. So there is something there. There is already, over the last 1 year, the Planetary Health Alliance coming out of the annual meeting that happened in Kuala Lumpur last year. There's been a new faith charter that has been released around planetary health that is there. So you can see it on the website. If you just go to there's on the new Planetary Health Alliance website, there's a whole section around culture and values, and in that you'll see the planetary health, the Sunway Charter, which is called Faith in Action, addressing planetary health challenges through spiritual leadership. And it really speaks to not just faith, but the concept of spiritual traditions coming together to address this need. Because again, this is where maybe the link with youth come in, is that many young people may prefer to kind of align themselves with spiritual teachings and traditions as opposed to faith. Sometimes there's a bit of a distrust in institutionalized faith and religion, the formal structures, but that doesn't mean people don't say that they have a faith or don't say that they align to some spiritual traditions. And so I think it's about elevating beyond the structural institutions and the formal kind of rituals to kind of say there's something a little bit more higher than that. And I think this is where we can start to have a conversation around this. I think I'll stop there because I would love to kind of hear what Navita and Tess also have to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salim, for those deeply insightful remarks. And as someone who has also had the chance to work with global youth mobilization before, for instance, I definitely agree that these institutions are absolutely vital to ensuring continued youth engagement in these topics. So thank you so much for those remarks. We now turn to our next speaker. Dr. Navita Khan is the professor of anthropology and affiliate faculty in Islamic Studies, Comparative Thought and Literature, and Environmental Science and Studies at Johns Hopkins University. She has worked for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Dhaka and Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, Travelers and Immigrants Aid of Chicago, and the Field Museum of Natural History. Her research spans riverine lives and national climate policy in Bangladesh, UN-led global climate governance processes, German Romanticism, Bengali and Urdu literature, and writings on the environment. She is the author of Muslim Becoming, Aspiration and Skepticism in Pakistan, River Life and the Upspring of Nature, and In Quest of a Shared Planet, Negotiating Climate from the Global South, and editor of Beyond Crisis, Reevaluating Pakistan. She's currently working on 2 manuscripts, Householding on a Warming Earth and Shelling and the Romantic Method. Dr. Khan will explore how riverine and faith communities in Bangladesh integrate health and environmental activism, and from an anthropological perspective, how faith has historically governed human-environment relationships and how it might promote environmental justice. Dr. Khan, we are honored to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel. I really appreciated Amjad's comments. Those were really actually very inspiring to, help us think about how exactly youth are to be included in the conversation around climate change. And I just want to underline one thing that he made very clear, which is that, the language of the youth are our future can be used as a mode of deferral. And it's very important to think about how it's not as though youth have to wait till they're grown up in the future to be a part of the conversation. The important thing to underline is how it is that youth have already made themselves parts of the conversation, how to acknowledge their contribution. So I thought that was a really wonderful comment there. As an anthropologist, I am a little less prone to prescription and a little more in terms of sort of providing you descriptions and of what I've seen. So if it's okay, I will just talk briefly about 2 fieldwork experiences. One, the subject of the book, In Quest of a Shared Planet, is my attending the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC for the last 8 or 9 years. And the second, talk a little bit briefly about the riverine communities that I've also been studying and is the basis of the book River Life and the Upspring of Nature. Okay, so what's really interesting in terms of and my focus will be a little bit more on faith than on youth, because I came to the question of youth a bit later, and so my observations have tended to be more on the participation by various faith communities. So what was really important about 2015, the COP that was held that year, was that was the year that the Paris Agreement was going to be inaugurated. Even before that inauguration, in anticipation of the fact that this was going to be such an important COP, Pope Francis wrote the encyclical Laudato Si, which came out in May 2015. And this encyclical, I will say, was one of the most powerful statements that I have read in recent times, which, in a very ecumenical way brought together the question of climate change, along with the question of the concern for the poor and health and the health of the earth together. And one of the most important statements that Pope Francis made was, how is it that we listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor together, right? And this combined statement, I think, really struck a chord with people, because it really underlined the importance of maintaining a focus on development and sustainable development, but also at the same time bringing in a concern for the earth as also deserving of our attention, of our care and repair, and so on. So that was something that Pope Francis's encyclical gave, and it received a lot of strong responses. And the one that I followed in particular was the one by the Islamic leadership of the world. An Islamic Declaration on Climate Change came out in August of 2015, and it was also very powerful. It brought up, again, some of the same themes that Amjad has already underlined for us, which is that, Islam, along with many other religions and faith traditions, has really thought of humans as the stewards of the earth, as needing to, take a course through life which is balanced and in harmony with other people, other communities, but also with the earth or nature or creation, as it often gets written up, avoiding of wastefulness. These were some of the very important, elements that a constituency of Muslim leaders from around the world actually articulated. And they were also very strong in their critique of the current situation, very much like Pope Francis was in his encyclical. And one of the things that they really underlined was, how do we attend to our greed for natural resources, right? And this was a very broad-based, I would say, critique of everyone, not just focused on Western industrialized countries, but also, developing countries, and the fact that, they were rapaciously using the natural resources of their own country to the to the damage of, say, their, of course, their ecosystems and their biodiversity, but also of the indigenous peoples who live in their environs. So that was a very important thing that I observed early on in my field work, in the climate negotiating space. The other thing that I've observed since that time is that there's been a shift in the earlier engagement, religious engagement in the climate negotiations. The climate negotiations are a very secular space and a space of statecraft, right? Where, the rationale that is usually used is this good for me? Is it good for my country and my people, right? And so there has to be a lot of work that has to be done to persuade countries to, one, acknowledge the science, two, acknowledge that this is a shared condition, and how to come up with shared responses. So the early religious engagement within this space tended to be not explicitly religious, really tiptoeing around the fact that they were coming from faith-based communities, etc., and really drilling down on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, on human rights. These were seen to be where it is that statecraft kind of met humanity or humans and human, everyday lives. And so that was what saw early on. But then, as I've been attending the COPs, the thing that has become really interesting is that, at least in the side event space, one has seen a very strong sort of upsurgence of religious communities doing incredible events around, examining traditions and texts in terms of what they have to offer, in terms of support of various kinds of activist and advocacy positions on the climate, on the inclusion of indigenous communities, youth, the poor, within these conversations, within the negotiations. Also, a turn to faith-based traditions to figure out how to modify our own desires and our own lifestyles. So you really see, for instance, communities, interfaith communities such as Bread for the World, Brahma Kumaris, Buddhist communities like Sakai Gakkai International, Muslim Council of Elders, really broad-based participation in these spaces. And it really culminates in COP28 in Dubai, where there was, for the first time, a very large pavilion, a faith-based pavilion, which was, a collaboration of various organizations and came under UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. And they started an initiative called Faith for Earth. And this faith-based constituency pavilion was broad-based. It brought a lot of people together, in conversation, in contemplation. It introduced a different note into the negotiations. The space of the negotiations are usually quite frenetic, and people are running around. No one has time for really proper, deep conversation. But this sort of created an opportunity for people to actually think together and strategize on how to continue their own activist and advocacy efforts, but also what could be done in various communities. What would solidarity, using this space for solidarity, look like? And so that was an interesting change that I saw over time. And of course, the other thing that tracks the rise of faith-based constituency is the rise of youth-based constituency and their mobilization within and outside the space. People like Greta and so on at the outside of the space, critiquing it, encouraging it to do better, do more, etc. And youth and faith-based have really been very strong collaborators within this space. So last thing I will say is, in my own actual field site, which is in the middle of a very large river in Bangladesh, and the river is is quite ferocious, so land comes and goes. So these are people who have lived in this very precarious and both dynamic but also precarious environment for a long period of time. And, being poor, and they have had to be incredibly resourceful. So there's no such thing as waste in this place. There's a lot of, pooling of resources, incredible reciprocity, strong notion of care for one another and for the land. I mean, alongside all the other bad things that society also has to offer. What's really interesting here is how it is that a sense of care for the other, human other or a non-human other, like animals or for the land, comes up in tiny ways and it is very resonant, again, with what Islam looks like in an everyday context. And so the one thing I would say, just thinking about, what is it that I would propose as a good set of ventures to invest in? It seems to me that what we still lack is a broad-based, across the global north and global south, across the youth in both of these areas, across different faith traditions, a broad-based conversation on what would ethical education on how to live a sustainable daily life look like, right? And I think those principles, if they can be made more explicit and they can be integrated in many, many ways, will allow, for example, the children in the field site that I'm at, even though, they are restrained in what they can do by being poor and, being more concerned about their daily lives, but still for them to have the same ethical tools at hand in the same way as you would a student in the US, would be a really powerful discursive connection, I think. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for those beautifully articulated insights into the lived experience of faith, landscape, health, and education. I appreciate your perspective on planetary health, societal, and environmental well-being through the lens of recent COPs. Your reflections on the Global South's role in international partnership through faith truly enrich today's conversation. Now we move to our final speaker. Teresa Gutau is an environmental scientist by training, and through Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, she is Kenya's communication officer in charge of strategizing and leading public relations, branding, communications, and social media. Teresa Gutau is a freelance environmental journalist by passion and has long-standing experience. She's a freelance faith environmental reporter, a part-time environmental editor for Page IX, a youth magazine telling African environmental and historical stories, and a member of Media and Environmental Science, Health and Agriculture, an association that trains health and environmental journalists in Kenya. She has previously worked as a radio reporter and news anchor. Recently, she was elected as the global co-chair for Women's Major Group in the UNEP and has been serving as a council member for the UNEP Faith for Earth Council since March 2024. Ms. Gutau will speak to how faith-based organizations can better incorporate health into their environmental work for both ecological and human well-being. Successful strategies she's seen in empowering youth to lead planetary health work through their spiritual beliefs, and how to make faith-based approaches more inclusive for youth not affiliated with religious institutions, while still rooted in shared values. Ms. Gutau, it's great to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eva, and also I'd like to thank our panelists who have come before me for their insight and for their wonderful knowledge. One thing that I find to be exciting as I begin is getting to listen to Dr. Naveed, who was talking about history, and just getting to hear and knowing that I have been part of it just for a few while, and also Sanessa, just getting to see what has become of faith in the climate change space and also in the environmental space, because we try as much as possible to make sure that, yes, the faith environment nexus, our voices are being heard, because as our speakers have mentioned, it's something that we are coming up, and it's a relatively new field. So looking at the questions that we've been given, the first thing that I'd like to talk about, especially when it comes to faith-based organizations and partnering with health professionals to make sure that we are having, what we are extending these messages, is partnering with health professionals and local clinics to ensure that we are having that awareness creation and also capacity building. So just borrowing from Kenya, what we see, and also across Africa, I am Catholic, and what I see, we have something like the Catholic doctors. So this means that each and every year, each and every quarter, the doctors from across all networks who are Catholic, they get to meet together to have discussions on various things that is happening in different fields. And I know this cuts across the entire world. So finding that when we have faith-based organizations that are working on the nexus between faith and environment, and it's very easy for them to tap into these organizations and to create forums and workshops that could further and also encourage doctors to actually look into this and to create more awareness. And this is a way that they can also be our ambassadors, and through their hospitals and their clinics, they'd be able to pass this information to the local citizenry to make sure that, yes, we are coming from a place of morals and faith, with which, as Amjad has mentioned, it can be a little bit tricky trying to navigate that platform, but it is not hard to try, because you never know. You might start with 100 and also 80 might pick up, and they will be able to advance that conversation, because we're trying to fix the problem just one conversation at a time, because it's not something that you can do, all of a sudden, but one step will be able to get there. The second thing would be using churches, mosques, and temples as a hub where we can have these conversations, because yes, we believe that there is an increasing number of people who don't believe in faith or associate with faith, but we have some who believe in spirituality, and still a large population, they still follow the institution, just looking at it globally, and they get to go to their churches, mosques, and temples. So what about having like workshops where we are inviting faith-based organizations to talk about the nexus between planetary health and environment? Because this is a place where, when we look at, let's say, our parents or even our great-grandparents, one thing that I know is that it is very easy for them to listen to their faith leaders more than the political and the scientific class. And that I believe to be true, especially in my African context, looking at my parents and grandparents. So having those workshops, they would heed to these calls, be it the youth also, and just going to our grandparents, they would listen, even if they will not come out with, let's say, 100% of the things, they would be able to come out with, let's say, 50, and it's something that it can be a work in progress to ensure that we are creating and also a safe space for them to ask all the questions that they have, because at times, you never know. You could hear climate denialism and all that, and it can be addressed in such platforms because we are going back to the grassroots levels. The other point that I have is looking at sermons and teachings. So it is important and imperative to have pastors and priests and also sisters and the lay people, the clergy, getting to understand the nexus between planetary health and environment. Why? Because they'd be able to include it in their sermons and in their teachings, and also they can go back and dig into the scriptures so that they can find a nexus between planetary health, environment, and also the faith. Where do we belong? How can we navigate this conversation, and how do we move it forward? So looking at it from the Catholic perspective, here in East Africa, we came the AMESEA, that is the regional conference of bishops from the East African countries. They broke down the Laudato Si into a booklet where the communities can use these booklets in their small Christian communities. So we call them jumuiyas, but you find that in these small Christian communities, it breaks it down on how family households can be able to, get to be aware of how their actions, that is the human actions, gets to impact the environment, and how they can be able to overcome this, and also put a record, something that can be translated back and can be put in databases that can be used in the Catholic Church. So, and we are talking about here being in East Africa. So it is important that we also bring in priests and also the pastors and the local clergy. The other point that I have when it comes to the individual persons is that we need to start with faith and not just by facts. And this we're talking about, faith can be uncomfortable. And my previous speakers have mentioned already, when we're talking about policy advocacies in the UN space, it's very secular. But when it comes to faith and trying to introduce it, there are those, a bit the nuances of backlash because of the history of what faith had, or rather religion, because faith and religion are different, what they have done in the past. And there are people who have these church wounds and they need to be validated. So how do we go from there to where we are at now? And the first thing would be, whatever you're doing, let your actions speak louder than words, because it is through your actions, because it cuts across all of us. We have all those universal values and they're actually deeply rooted in our faith. So starting from there and now building up with stories, we get to talk about, people get to see, and it's through our actions that we get to inspire better actions in other people. The other thing would be using our own LinkedIn platforms that is social media, digital platforms, to talk about our stories. What I see is that when you have all these faith-based organizations just talking about their stories, and also the Unifaith for Earth Youth Council putting out stories on what they're doing, that is not enough. Because these are organizations, these are entities. What about us at an individual level? It is important to make sure that we are telling these stories, because we are amplifying what we are doing in these institutions, and people tend to connect more with the person behind the story. We get to resonate more, we get to ask questions one-on-one, and you never know, you'll find that your story is being reposted or is being reshared, because something that you said, it is resonating. So making sure that you're talking from an angle of, this is my story, this is my belief, and not sitting and just drumming, just making sure that you incorporate faith. And then we are talking about planetary health, just making sure that it comes out clearly, and also giving out solutions to ensure that the members and the people who are following you, they're able to pick out the actions that they be able to follow through in their houses and in their walks of life. So the other thing would be, when it comes to the youth, is to give them platform. And I think Amjad had mentioned it very powerfully, that yes, we have, as young people, we have a lot of ideas, and we need a platform to share our ideas and what we are talking about. And also being given platform to actually lead. At times we normally say power is not given, it's actually taken, yes, but also getting that platform through intergenerational dialogue, and also through all these entities that we have, so that, and also if at all we don't have one, you can make your own platform through the social media platforms, to make sure that whatever you have in mind, you are putting across for other people to get to hear. And you never know, someone out there will get to hear you and they'll give you that platform that you need. So if you feel like there is none, then you can create yours and then build up to it. And finally, what if you're not part of the institutionalized phase and you're wondering how do we start with it? So basically, just going back, would look at the UNEP Faith for Earth Youth Council. It brings together, first of all, we collaborate across sectors. We have different faiths, different youth representatives coming together, and we are working. First of all, we are discussing, getting to understand what are the youths doing in various places, because we have different problems and we need different solutions. And you never know. There's a solution that maybe someone has implemented somewhere and it might work in your own region. So through the UNEP Faith for Earth, the first thing is to collaborate through brainstorming. And if you can get to sit and through those conversations, it allows us to collaborate externally and make sure that we are coming up with different solutions to different problems. That is more encouraged, and it will help us to get to the solutions that you are getting. At SINESA, the thing that we do is the Laudato Si Youth Assembly. It brings together youth from all over Africa. It does not matter your faith. If you're a Muslim, whichever, whether you're Catholic, whether you don't believe in a higher power, it is a space where we allow young people to come and talk, because if at all you're hard, then we'll have different conversations. At times we tend to shy away from hard conversations, but it is important for us to get to listen to one another, because it's not something that I can sit and tell you that today you need to do A, B, C, D, and it's something that is going to sink in. No, but it is a journey that we go through, and we make sure that, yes, the logic, the science behind it, the faith behind it blends. And with that, you find that we may never agree, but there's those fundamentals about universal values that will bring us together to ensure that we agree that we need to take care of our common planet, and it is paramount that this message is shared amongst other people. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for the opportunity, and over to you, Eva and Emin.
Thank you so much, Tess, for those beautiful and insightful remarks once again. You did really paint a vibrant perspective on how youth can get involved through through faith platforms, but also creating their own faith platforms, and how and why youth should get involved in that space. So thank you very much for that. So we would like to thank each of our speakers for their generosity, insight, and commitment. Today has made it clear that planetary health and environmental activism in general isn't just a scientific or moral pursuit, but it's also a deeply human one. It's tied to identity, culture, and meaning. And as we confront the degradation of the health of our planet, health inequality, and youth disconnection, we should keep in mind that faith, values, and spirituality can be a bridge, not a barrier, to collaboration and advocacy in this field of planetary health and environmental activism. So thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you again to
I mean, I just wanted to kind of pick up on a couple of things that both Navita and Tess said. I think it's quite important. I love the piece about what Navita talked about in finally the ethical tool and the ethical education on that transnational perspective, right? And I couldn't agree more. But also just to add, it's not just the formal education piece. There's a non-formal, and I will say this because I'm coming from the Red Cross and I work with the Scouts and I work with the Girl Guides and everything else. There's a non-formal education piece there, which again then brings back the role of faith communities, because this is where, I mean, let's face it, most of our lessons that we've learned in life, our leadership lessons, it comes from volunteering or from all of these groups, right? We don't really learn this in university. I apologize, Navita, you're in a university, so I'm probably sort of saying I'm not sort of flying the flag for formal education, but I think that there's a great complementarity there, right? And I think it's great for us to look at that and sort of think about the role of non-formal education, and then just link that back to what Tess was also talking about, and I think everyone's kind of alluded to, is that there is a space for the scholars of the text and the scholars of the context to come together, right? And we need to have more of those conversations, right? I think the scholars of the text, the faith leaders, often think that they have all the answers. They probably don't, because they come from a specific space as well, and they're not necessarily versed with that. And I think scholars of the context need to have the humility to sort of think that they don't have all the answers. So I think if we can create spaces for that type of conversation, and I think this is what everyone's alluded to today, I think that's the important thing. And in that, there's an intergenerational perspective. Sorry, I just thought I wanted to kind of highlight, because I felt like that for me is what is coming out of the conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Salim. Dr. Khan, Tess, do you also have any thoughts on that topic, or?
Yeah, I'll again underline what Amjad is saying, which is that when we say we need an ethical education, it doesn't mean we need it to be in a university or in a school. We have to figure out how this whole mechanism of informal education, which has been one of the most powerful ways in which young in the world have been receiving their education in the last century, it also needs to be tapped. I completely agree with that. And I also agree with what Tess was saying, which is how do we mobilize, existing infrastructure in the form of actual priests and imams and so on, and mosques and temples and churches. In the past, when it was done, it was just really the space that was used. For example, calling people to come and get their polio shots or whatever, right? Or their flu shots. But what Tess is pointing to is that this is such a missed opportunity. It could be an opportunity where you could have those conversations. Why is it that we think that these spaces are really just spaces of giving this formal education or formal religious training? Why is it that we can't just have more open-ended conversations on what would, environment, ethics of the environment directed at the environment with the youth involved, a part of it, look like in these spaces? Why has that not been more explored, right? Which I think, I get from both of these speakers. Thank you.
So on my side, I'd just like to give an example. In any country, when you go to the most remote of villages, you'll always find a church, a temple, or a mosque. So if it's to go to the grassroots level and you'd want to tap into those areas, these areas might lack networks, the signal, but these people will never miss to go to church for their sermons. So if you can tap into that opportunity, then we'll be able to reach the most marginalized of communities. And the other thing that I normally have come to discover and observe is that faith and reason, that is faith and science, they get to marry. They only clash when one tries to cross over or tries to make sure that the other doesn't seem important. But if we stick to where we are and try to find the synergies, we will find that they marry and they tend to explain each other. Thank you so much, and over to you, Emin.
I would thank you so much for your additional comments. These were really valuable. Your note about diverse education systems speaks to the importance of lived experience and open conversations in this intersection. That's just the importance and the nature of storytelling and community building that informal faith institutions and upbringings can reach, especially in this planetary health movement. So thank you again to our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. And thank you so much to the 2025 ECOSOC Youth Forum for making this possible. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
All right.